Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments, particularly the release of 8 hostages today, 3 of them Israelis, 5 Thai nationals, it's important to note that these hostages have stayed in Hamas captivity for 482 days, during the course of which, of course, they underwent the toughest of conditions, a devastating war that started with Hamas's atrocities committed on October 7th, during the course of which those hostages that are released today are indeed captured on that horrendous day. Now let's turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you tell us about that specifically? Of course, they have been absorbed by separate hospitals and are currently undergoing checks and to make sure that they are in good condition. Of course, the release of the hostages was somewhat chaotic.
Right. And as you mentioned, out of the 8 hostages released, 5 are Thai nationals. They will also, of course, undergo medical checkup and treatment, and they were received by representatives of the Thai government. And out of the 3 Israelis, one is 80 years old. The other, the first male to be released. Of course, there were 2 Israeli males who were rescued last year in a daring operation, but this is the first male hostage to be released as part of a deal, and 2 females, one of whom is a soldier who was abducted from her base, and the other one is a civilian abducted from her kibbutz. Now, they were all helicoptered to various hospitals. The Deputy Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Health briefed the press on the condition of the 7 female hostages released over the last week and a half or so. And he said that they are all in good or at least stable condition, no substantial problems. They could be either released from hospital, or the 4 soldiers who served with the one released today asked to stay with her during her first week at hospital in order to help her reacclimate into Israel. However, while this is going on, and as you mentioned, there was a chaotic scene when the Islamic Jihad let go of 2 of the 3 hostages. The Hamas event was more orderly. The ceasefire goes on in Gaza as well as in Lebanon, even though one reconnaissance drone was flown by Hezbollah and was intercepted by the Israeli Air Force. There is also a sort of a ceasefire with the Houthis in Yemen. They are holding their fire. However, in the West Bank, northern Samaria, at Jenin, there are firefights. The Israeli operation goes on, and while the last Israeli fatality in combat was announced 10 days ago on January the 10th, nevertheless, there are difficult missions at Jenin, and one cannot vouch that we have seen the last of it.
Correction, the last IDF casualty to include also 3 wounded IDF soldiers was on January 20th, 10 days ago, when a roadside bomb exploded and brought about this devastating fatality and casualties. The perpetrators of this event were thankfully, they faced justice yesterday when the IDF, in close cooperation with the ISA, or Shin Bet, Israel Security Agency, have launched an aerial strike on a gathering of armed terrorists in the northern Samaria sector, during the course of which at least 10 terror operatives, including those two who were responsible for the deadly attack on January 20th again, uh, were eliminated. And as you mentioned, in Judea and Samaria, particularly in the northern Samaria area, which is a terror-infested territory, which is currently being subject not only to an Israeli counter-terrorist operation dubbed Iron Wall, but also a Palestinian Authority counter-terror operation in which many members, operatives of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terror cells which receive the backings from the Islamic Republic of Iran are being confronted, apprehended, and eliminated time and again. Now, on that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Oli Saschal, the head of the research department at the IDSF, namely in Israel we call it Habitchonistim, one of the largest military security organizations present today here in Israel. And it's good to see you all. I'd like to immediately ask you, particularly on the circumstances of the ongoing efforts to eradicate terrorism throughout Judea and Samaria, including the Jordan Valley, from which much of the munitions, funds, and other illicit materials are being smuggled into from Jordanian territory.
Hi, Jonathan. Good to be with you. Yeah, absolutely. This is quite a challenge for our security forces, given that Judea and Samaria is a bubbling melting pot of terrorism, as you say, teeming with terrorism. And so the challenge right now for both Israeli communities and the IDF is, of course, stopping the floodgates of terrorism, especially armament, munitions that are smuggled from Jordan into Judea and Samaria, really flooding the whole territory with the weaponry. And as we can see, there are not only a multitude of shooting attacks and other attacks toward Israelis, but also the IDF has ramped up its activity. As you mentioned, the Iron Wall operation in Jenin is just the latest expression of it. The Air Force is much more involved today than ever before, with drones shooting at suspected vehicles and terrorists, and D9 tractors who are evacuating IEDs, or improvised explosive devices, who are threatening the forces. And all these things really are going into the hornet's nest and trying to, as we say, empty the sea with a little spoon. And we see how it can work with tackling specific threats. But on the long run, Israel for many years tried to really take control over this unbelievable scandal where Palestinian villages around Judea and Samaria are posing a direct threat on Israeli communities, shooting at houses of Israeli communities, including the kibbutzim nearby. And all of these things really behoove us to look long-term. And I understand that the IDF is trying to maintain some sort of a low flame in Judea and Samaria over the course of this war. Focus is currently in Gaza and Lebanon. But ultimately, there will going to have to be a long-term vision to Judea and Samaria, what Israel has not yet presented for over 50 years. And the solution in this case is not to impose, radical ideological visions on Israel and the Palestinians as the two-state proposal, but rather to be real about the options on the ground. Israel has to maintain the Jordan Valley and stop this inflow of munitions. Otherwise, there will be a direct route from Tehran to Tel Aviv, and maintain control over strategic mountain ranges that pose direct threat to Israeli communities. And above that, we'll have to take a renewed look at Palestinian communities and see if the Palestinian Authority is the correct entity to maintain control over these autonomies, or there should be some sort of a local form to take the lead from the Palestinian Authority that is teeming with corruption and encouraging terrorism.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. With that being said, yesterday we saw Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz travel to Jenin, northern Samaria, during the course of which he also had a message to the Palestinian Authority. Mr. Owen?
Yes, he maintained that Israel would no longer accept the reality, the former reality of having such raids, successful as they have been. This success was always short term. And this time around, the plan is for a force, probably a battalion sized force, to remain at the Jenin refugee camp, which is not really a camp. If you have a mental picture of tents, this is no longer the case. Of course, the refugees have been there since 1948, and these are their grandchildren and great grandchildren already. And this is one of the places where terror cells have thrived, and therefore the force is going to be there to forestall any new activity, any insurgency. Hopefully, it will not be costly to the troops, because we know the routine. Once they are there, they also become victims, and sometimes the hunters turn around to be those on the other side of the hunt.
Indeed. Well, it's an interesting point that the legal term defined as such by the United Nations, namely refugee camps, has been lingering for so long, considering the fact that beyond all the parameters, all the criteria for being just another town or another city are there, but nonetheless they're still defined as a refugee camp, something that is still defined as such also here in Israel in Hebrew, Machane Plitim, refugee camp. So that is something we should ask the defense minister, Mr. Issachar, when we get a chance to do. Why do they still term those specific camps as such? But I'd like to shift gears one moment back to the Gaza Strip, where we had yesterday Steve Witkoff, the President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, in charge also of the ongoing negotiations and deal that was outlined in order to secure the release of the hostages in Hamas captivity. Naturally, he was there to receive a first-hand account of the situation on the ground, particularly in the Netzarim corridor, which opened up for Palestinians to transit from southern Gaza to the northern part of the enclave. But at the same time, after returning to Israel, in his meetings with both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz, he did highlight and deliberate extensively the proposal by President Trump on potentially transferring Palestinians for a certain period of time from Gaza, both to Jordan and Egypt. Subsequently, we heard the Egyptian president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, come out and say that they would not accept it. And he tried to convince the Egyptian head of state, the Egyptian people, that President Trump actually is a proponent of a two-state solution, which, of course, Trump himself said he's not very, or he doesn't really care for the outcome. He cares for an outcome that will ultimately be negotiated by both relevant parties. What can you tell us about that, and give us a little bit of an overview, a broader overview of the ins and outs of this challenging notion?
Look, needless to say, President Trump is bringing a fresh perspective on the Middle East. And so the main question right now is what will end the bloodshed and lead Israel to victory and the Middle East to peace, and not repeat the paradigms of the past. We saw how, as you mentioned, the slogan of two-state solution, it's really an inanity. We see how the Palestinians are not focused on the 67 territories, the ceasefire line between Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, They're focused on what the narrative, that Palestinian narrative has been all along, in all their logos, in all their publications, the entirety of the land of Israel. So unless we have a plan to evacuate all Israelis somewhere, this is not realistic. And so the question is what Israel can offer in order to give Palestinians some sort of autonomy, like they have in Judea and Samaria, but much more stringent, much more productive to Israel's security. And eventually in the Gaza Strip, what's going to happen? It's not going to rely on fallacies like we see even the United Nations claiming there is a genocide, starvation, and so on, but on truths. And Mr. Witkoff has visited the area. He saw for himself how Israel has to maintain crucial corridors and areas to its security, but also we heard Mr. Rubio, the Secretary of State, say that Hamas can no longer be in charge of the Gaza Strip. This is realistic talk, as in Israel has entered this war in order to degrade and ultimately defeat Hamas. And at the end the game of this war, the other end of this war cannot be October 6th. That is going back to square one, where Hamas is governor of the Gaza Strip, posing a direct threat on Israelis. And it's such a misleading statement to say Hamas cannot carry out another October 7 right now. Needless to say. But how about tomorrow? How about next month and next year? So that exposes Israel to a direct threat. It sends a message of weakness across the Middle East. And instead of that, we need to think outside the box to find some sort of another arrangement in Gaza. And much like President Trump managed to convince Colombia and other nations to accept outgoing migrants despite their initial protestations, Jordan and Egypt, yeah, it's a different case. But still, we are committed to find a more creative solution to the Gaza Strip rather than establishing a Hamas state over there that would pose a threat to the entire Middle East. And so maybe to linger on this point, just with a final sentence, we talked about fallacies and truths. We are told endlessly that there's genocide and starvation and all these things in the Gaza Strip. We just saw today 3 hostages released with HD cameras and high-resolution microphones and the whole backstage and the platform set to their release. We see how Palestinians are fully dressed and fully equipped to document this with their phones. So we see the big, big lie that we were told about the Gaza Strip and conditions there. Needless to say, it's a very severe war zone, but to see this condition of Israeli hostages surrounded by a mob of Palestinians from Gaza, you see how it has permeated the anti-Semitic narrative among the Palestinian population, how it has permeated among the population, and how Israel cannot possibly risk to take another risk like the 2005 disengagement, how we can no longer take the risk, we cannot afford to take the risk to go back to square one October 6th and wait out to the next massacre.
2 brief points. The first one, when we're talking about the Islamist Hamas and the correct characterization that they are lacking nothing, the fact of the matter is they actually made more than $1 billion over the course of the past couple of months just by taking over the humanitarian aid and selling it with a significant surplus to the Gazans who are the poor civilians in the streets. So naturally, this humanitarian aid that needs to come to the Gaza Strip in order to assist those uninvolved civilians, regrettably, Hamas is exploiting this and then utilizing it for its own purposes. Now, with regard to Egypt and Jordan, both countries are heavily reliant on U.S. aid. I think Egypt receives annually $1.3 billion in military aid, and Jordan receives also several hundreds of millions of dollars from the United States, in addition to other assistance in order to sustain and also stabilize to a certain degree those countries, which are very strategic when we're talking about their locations. Now, Mr. Oren, when we're talking about the Jordanian file, first and foremost, let's congratulate the king, Abdullah II, for his 63rd birthday. I think also his son on the same date, 30th of January, who turns 20, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, Mr. Oren, they are a monarchy under threat. The Iranians are very keen on seeing this monarchy fall and establishing an eastern front against Israel, something that Israel is also preparing for actively.
So this has to do with your discussion with Or regarding President Trump's relocation proposal. Now, obviously, 5 years ago, when he came out with his vision for peace and prosperity, President Trump was for a two-state solution. Of course, the Palestinians would have to meet certain criteria in order for the Palestinian Authority to control both the West Bank and Gaza. And these conditions were never met. But yes, he is pragmatic. He is willing to take any solution acceptable to the parties there. But there is a fine line between real estate and realpolitik. The very stability of the Jordanian monarchy, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, which you are referring to, depends on the demographic balance, not to be upset by an influx of additional Palestinians. And we have a lesson in history to remind us how precarious it could become for Israel, and not only for the Arab countries involved. In September of 1970, and then again in June of 71, after clashes between Palestinians and King Hussein, many Palestinians were evicted, were deported to Lebanon. And the fact that they have then established the so-called Fatah land in South Lebanon and became a destabilizing force was one of the major causes for the Lebanese civil war of the 1970s, and then the Israeli raid, which became an invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Both the Egyptian government and the Jordanian one are too delicate to experiment with by an infusion, even if they are only guests, as Trump now sees it, only for the duration of the rebuilding of Gaza. Now, obviously, his intention is very positive, but the result could become very negative.
Indeed. Well, this is a school of thought, of course, that is pushed forward by the Jordanians and Egyptians for many years, and something that is taken heed of. We don't have very much time left, so each one of you is going to get 1 minute and 45 seconds to conclude your remarks with whatever you'd like to add to our discussion today. Mr. Issachar, go ahead.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Jordanian king has a birthday. It might not be the worst idea to buy him a gigantic mirror, because the Jordanians themselves created much of that problem when revoking Jordanian citizenship from over 1 million Palestinians in August 1988. Palestinians are living in Judea and Samaria. And so Jordan has a responsibility, it has a stake in the problem, and its responsibility is not only to smear Israel, but also to resolve some of the problem. And I'm sure Egypt, with over 100 million people, can help as well. Eventually, this might not be the solution. Another proposal might be the solution, other countries, etc. But the bottom line is that the Israeli interest is first and foremost here, not just the Jordanian, Egyptian, or Palestinian interest, but the Israeli interest to assure there is no future massacre coming out from the Gaza Strip.
Which is also a Western interest at large, and an American in particular, Mr. Owen.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Defense Minister Israel Katz. 4 days ago, he interviewed 3 major generals, 2 still in the career corps. One left the service 2 years ago and is on the reserve list, but is running the Ministry of Defense as Director General. And he is about to disclose his recommended appointee for Chief of General Staff. This is a momentous decision because the next Chief of General Staff, who will take over from Herzi Halevi on or about March the 6th, is going to lead the IDF in an uncharted course of rebuilding, reorienting both the force buildup and the employment on the various fronts.
to delay or prevent war, one needs to prepare for one. But in any event, if I have to speculate who might be the next top contender, I'd go for the latter candidate that you refer to, Major General Eyal Zamir, who is naturally, as Director General of the Defense Ministry, quite potent. Also, his contenders are, but nonetheless, I think that he has a broader understanding and a toolbox to contend with realities at hand. Some may say that it's a good analogy to the days of Amir Peretz as defense minister and Gabi Ashkenazi, who then entered under him after also serving as Director General of the Defense Ministry. And the fruit that yielded out of that ultimately brought about the integration of the Iron Dome system. So that is something that we can at least hope that a new type of Iron Dome will be brought in the form of both defense and offense, but go figure. A closing sentence from you, Mr. Yisrael?
Yeah, I think eventually we all understand how the Middle East has changed, and it's not time to go back and see what they proposed in the 1980s or 1990s, or during even the Obama or Biden administrations. But looking forward, I think the Trump administration has a real opportunity here to bring peace to the Middle East, not by weakness and concessions, but by showing force. And I think it serves the interests both of the United States and Israel and the region, to be honest, to secure peace, to prevent more migration waves, and to prevent the future war. And I think the core problem here, the core destabilizing factor in the Middle East remains, of course, Iran and its nuclear program. And it is the Trump administration will have to tackle this threat one way or another in the coming weeks and months, given the urgency of the threat, the uranium enrichment pace, and the clear and present threats by Iran to destroy Israel. Maybe it's a fear that given the Assad regime fell, there is a direct threat on their regime, and so they will rush to nuclear weapons. All these things pose direct threat to Israel, the region, the United States, and the world. And the Trump administration, I'm sure, will do whatever it takes to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
Mr. Yisrael, Mr. Oren, thank you so very much for both of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom. TV7 Israel invites you to watch and hear some of the most knowledgeable experts, most of whom partook in creating policies shaping this region today. Join us for Jerusalem Studio. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at TV7israelnews.com.